Hello! Today, we're going to delve into an incredibly complex and influential figure in history. A man who was the grandson of Genghis Khan, but walked a very different path. Someone who not only elevated the Mongol Empire to a new form, but also forever changed his own identity and the destiny of a great civilization, China. This man is Kublai Khan. The historical sources we have present a very multidimensional picture of him. The story of Kublai Khan's life, from his birth in 1215 to his death in 1294, is truly like a cinematic film. It's a tale filled with war and bloodshed, complex court politics, remarkable cultural and economic innovations, and, of course, very significant failures. Today, we want to explore how a Mongol prince, a direct descendant of Genghis, became the Emperor of China. To begin, we must start from the very beginning. Kublai was the second son of Tolui, who was Genghis Khan's son, and his mother, Sorgatani Beki. His mother, Sorgatani Beki, was herself a very influential Nestorian Christian woman, and she is a point of great interest. She was very attentive to the upbringing of her children, including Kublai, and apparently encouraged them to become familiar with other cultures. Perhaps this explains why Kublai, unlike many Mongol princes of that era, had a special attraction to Chinese culture from a young age, even though he initially did not know the language. He was surrounded by Buddhist, Confucian, and even Muslim advisors. It was as if he was searching for something more than just conquest in the traditional Mongol style. He was seeking knowledge, seeking different models of governance. This interest took a practical turn in 1251. At that time, his older brother, Mongke, was the great Khan of the Mongol Empire. Mongke sent Kublai to China and gave him the responsibility of administering the newly conquered northern regions. Kublai effectively became the viceroy of northern China, and it was here that his first experiences in governance began, and he performed very well. Instead of just collecting taxes and applying pressure, he began to improve agriculture and build infrastructure. He was, in a way, managing social welfare. This led many powerful Han Chinese warlords, who were initially suspicious of the Mongols, to become interested in and support him. So he was building a power base for himself among the Chinese. At the same time, Kublai also demonstrated his military might. His first major conquests occurred during this period. In 1253, he went after the kingdom of Dali in the modern-day Yunnan region of southwestern China. Here again, Kublai's distinct approach is evident. He fought and won, but when the king of Dali surrendered, contrary to expectations, Kublai did not kill him. He spared him. He even used the forces of that defeated king to conquer the rest of the Yunnan region. This was a very intelligent move. He both captured the region and gained new forces, while also perhaps building a better image for himself. It showed that he wasn't just thinking about the power of the sword, but was also seeking a kind of stability and cooperation. Another important event during this period, in 1258, was the great religious debate he organized between the Buddhists and the Taoists. There were many disputes between these two groups, especially over financial matters and temple properties. Kublai acted as a sort of judge and ultimately ruled in favor of the Buddhists. This showed both that he was becoming more deeply involved in China's internal affairs and that he had a greater inclination towards Tibetan Buddhism, which he and his wife Chabi followed. Everything was going well until a major event occurred, the death of Mongke Khan. In 1259, while campaigning in southern China, Mongke died either from illness or from being wounded in battle. This sudden death plunged the Mongol Empire into a very serious succession crisis. It was here that Kublai came into conflict with his younger brother, Arikboka. Arikboka was in the traditional Mongol capital, Karakoram, and was supported by the traditional Mongol nobility who wanted the empire's center to remain there and for Mongol traditions to be preserved. But Kublai's power base was in China, and he was primarily supported by Mongol forces stationed in China and his Chinese allies. This marked the beginning of the Tuluid Civil War, named after the House of Tului, the father of Kublai and Bokeh, which lasted from 1260 to 1264. It was a very difficult and complex war, with the fate of the entire empire tied to it. Ultimately, due to his greater resources and the power base he had built in China, Kublai gained the upper hand and was victorious. Bokeh surrendered and later died in captivity. Kublai officially became the Great Khan of the Mongol Empire. But in practice, this victory came at the cost of the empire's unity. The Western Khanates, like the Golden Horde in modern-day Russia or the Ilkhanate in Iran and the Middle East, effectively used this opportunity to become independent. The unified empire of Genghis's time or his immediate successors was never to be repeated. Kublai understood this. Instead of putting his energy into recontrolling those distant regions, he made a strategic and very important decision to focus all his attention on China, where his main power base was and which had immense economic and cultural potential. He no longer wanted to be just a Mongol Khan controlling China from afar. He wanted to become the emperor of China. And here is the main turning point of the story. In 1271, Kublai made a very symbolic and important move. He officially announced the establishment of a new Chinese-style dynasty, named the Yuan. The name Yuan means great origin or primal origin, and was taken from a classic Chinese philosophical text, the I Ching or Book of Changes. He even chose a Chinese name for his dynasty to gain legitimacy. He also completely moved his capital from Karakoram to a city he named Dadu, meaning Great Capital, which is precisely where modern-day Beijing is located. The center of gravity of the Mongol world had shifted from the steppes of Mongolia to the heart of Chinese civilization. With this act, he presented himself as the legitimate successor to the previous Chinese dynasties. This was the first time in history that a completely non-Han, non-ethnic Chinese dynasty had succeeded in bringing all of China under its rule and considering itself a continuation of Chinese history and civilization. But one piece of the puzzle was still missing. Southern China was still in the hands of the Song dynasty. Kublai's greatest military challenge to complete this project, unifying China under the Yuan banner, was the conquest of the vast and wealthy territory of the Southern Song dynasty. This war was very difficult. The Southern Song had a long history of resisting the Mongols, and this battle lasted for decades. It was a war full of long sieges, river and naval battles, and the use of new military technologies. The Mongols, especially under Kublai, very cleverly used specialists from other parts of the empire. Muslim engineers, particularly from Persia and Central Asia, played a key role in building highly advanced and large catapults that could destroy the thick walls of Chinese cities. They, in a sense, utilized the full potential of their multicultural empire. The key and decisive battle was the siege of the twin cities of Shenyang and Fancheng, which lasted for years. These cities were like the gateway to the heart of the Song territory. Their fall in 1273 was a fatal blow to the Song. The final and tragic battle was the naval battle of Yamen in 1279. There, the last remnants of the Song court and army, with hundreds of thousands of people, including the child emperor and his family, were resisting on ships. The Mongols besieged them with a massive fleet, and after a horrific battle, almost everyone was killed or drowned themselves in the sea to avoid capture. It was a tragic end for the Song dynasty. But with this victory, Kublai finally achieved his goal. All of China was united for the first time under the command of a non-Chinese emperor. He was now Emperor Shizu of Yuan, the founder of the Yuan Dynasty. Now that he was the emperor of all of China, how did he rule? Did he try to completely Mongolize China, or did he become more absorbed into Chinese culture and its system of government? This is where Kublai's complexity becomes more apparent. He implemented a combination of both. On one hand, he preserved and even improved the traditional Chinese administrative structure based on dividing the country into provinces. This system became the foundation for China's provincial divisions in subsequent dynasties up to the present day. That is, he kept the Chinese bureaucratic structure. He also used Chinese officials, although in the highest ranks, Mongols and their non-Chinese allies, whom they called Samu, such as Uyghurs, Persians, and Europeans, were given preference. But he also created a social class system with 4 tiers. First the Mongols, then the non-Chinese allies Samu, then the northern Chinese Han-Ren, and finally the southern Chinese Non-Ren. This of course caused a series of tensions and dissatisfactions. In the field of public works, he accomplished great things. Perhaps the most important was the restoration and expansion of the Grand Canal of China. This canal, which connected northern and southern China, was vital for transporting grain and goods and greatly strengthened the empire's economy. As for paper money, which was called Chao, he made it the primary and nationwide currency of the empire. This was unprecedented in the world on that scale. Marco Polo, who traveled to China during this period, was very surprised by this system of paper money and credit. Although this system worked very well at first and facilitated trade, later on, especially under Kublai's successors, they began to print money excessively without sufficient backing. The result was horrific inflation and the discrediting of paper money, which became one of the factors in the weakening of the Yuan Dynasty in the following decades. Culturally and scientifically, his court at Dadu, Beijing, became a great cultural and scientific center. He supported astronomers, mathematicians, physicians, artists, and writers from all over the empire and even from abroad. A new calendar was developed, cartography advanced, and Chinese theater and drama flourished during this period. Marco Polo, his father and his uncle, served at Kublai's court for years, and Marco Polo himself speaks with wonder in his travelogue about the greatness, wealth, and organization of Kublai's court and empire. The presence of Europeans at the Yuan court is a confirmed fact. In general, he continued the policy of religious tolerance that was a legacy of Genghis. Islam, Nestorian Christianity, Buddhism, and Taoism were all allowed to operate. But as we said, he was very close to Tibetan Buddhism, and Buddhists, especially Tibetan lamas, gained great influence at court. Of course, he also imposed some restrictions on certain groups, for example on Muslims regarding the method of slaughter, or on the Chinese regarding the carrying of weapons, which sometimes caused discontent. So far, we have mostly talked about his successes, but it seems that not all of his campaigns and plans were successful. Kublai's ambitions did not end after conquering China. He tried to expand his empire eastward and southeastward, but here he faced heavy defeats. The most famous of these was the attempt to conquer Japan. Twice, in 1274 and again in 1281, he tried to conquer Japan. Both times he sent huge multinational fleets, including Mongol, Chinese, and Korean soldiers. But both times disaster struck. Very strong storms, terrible typhoons battered his fleet. Many ships sank and thousands of soldiers were killed or captured. The Japanese named these storms kamikaze, meaning divine wind, because they believed their gods were protecting them. Of course, the storm was not the only reason for the failure. Weaknesses in shipbuilding, as many ships were built in a hurry, the Mongols' lack of familiarity with naval warfare, and, of course, the fierce resistance of the Japanese samurai also played a role. These defeats were very costly and dealt a severe psychological and financial blow to Kublai. He also had other unsuccessful campaigns. His attacks to the south, on Vietnam, then known as Dai Viet and Champa, and on Java, modern-day Indonesia, were also largely unsuccessful and very costly. The dense jungles, unfavorable climate, diseases, and local resistance made things very difficult for the Mongol army. These failures and costs certainly had an impact on the last years of his life. These problems coincided with personal difficulties. The death of his beloved and influential wife Chabi in 1281 was a huge emotional blow to him. Chabi was not just his wife, she was also a very important and influential advisor. And then this was almost the final blow. His favorite son and official heir, Zhenjin, whom he had prepared extensively for succession and who was well versed in Chinese culture, died suddenly in 1286. This event left Kublai deeply depressed and devastated. The end of his life was a difficult period. Successive military defeats, economic problems, the loss of his loved ones, and his own health problems were added to the mix. In his later years, Kublai became severely overweight and suffered from gout, a very painful joint disease. He had also turned to alcohol for solace. Ultimately, Kublai Khan, Emperor Shizu of Yuan, passed away in 1294 at the age of 78 in his capital, Dadu. After Zhenjin's death, Kublai had chosen his grandson, Zhenjin's son, Temur, as the crown prince, and it was Temur who succeeded him as Emperor Chenzong after Kublai's death. If we want to summarize the legacy of Kublai Khan, we must say that he was undoubtedly one of the greatest and most influential rulers in world history. He was an extraordinarily multifaceted figure. On one hand, a ruthless and ambitious conqueror in the Mongol style, on the other, a culture-loving patron of science and art and the founder of a great and lasting dynasty in China. Perhaps his greatest achievement was reuniting China after several centuries of division and creating a unified and powerful China with an efficient administrative system that formed the foundations of modern China. The infrastructure he created, such as the Grand Canal or the system of roads and post stations, remained influential for a long time afterward. But on the other hand, the global Mongol Empire effectively disintegrated during his time. His excessive focus on China caused his ties with the other Mongol Khanates to weaken, and they went their own ways. So it can be said that he united China but pushed the Mongol Empire towards its final fragmentation. His legacy in China itself is also complex. On one hand, there was construction and relative stability. On the other, discrimination against the Chinese and the heavy costs of wars. The Yuan Dynasty he founded, despite its significant achievements, was overthrown less than a century later by a national Chinese uprising led by the Ming Dynasty. Many Chinese never accepted Mongol rule as a legitimate and native government. Kublai Khan was a figure who seemed to be always caught between two worlds, the world of the Mongolian steppes and the world of civilized bureaucratic China. He was a bridge between East and West, between nomadic culture and sedentary culture. And his legacy is just as complex and multi-layered. A great conqueror, an efficient emperor, an innovative emperor, and at the same time, someone who experienced great failures and perhaps unintentionally planted the seeds of future conflicts. And this question remains. Should Kublai Khan be remembered more as the last influential great Khan of the Mongols or as the founder of an important dynasty in the history of China? How did these two identities combine within him, and ultimately, was his attempt to merge these two worlds successful? Where does his true legacy lie in history?